How's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so Simone de Beauvoir, in her opus magnum, The Second Sex, says something pretty interesting about happiness. She says this. She says, those who are condemned to stagnation are often pronounced happy on the pretext that happiness consists in being at rest. Now, to be specific, she is, of course, talking about women here and their historical oppression. She's saying that historically, men, and even to some extent women themselves, have tried to keep steady and controllable the condition of women under the pretext that happiness consists in a kind of stasis. In other words, she's saying that men have traditionally encouraged women to find fulfillment in a kind of happiness marked by passivity and rest. Okay, but I want to move the oppression angle aside here and just focus in on this conception of happiness in general. So I think you could say that generally speaking, de Beauvoir was skeptical of any kind of passive happiness, whomever was living it. For her, happiness as a form of mere contentment and no struggle, or happiness characterized by the acceptance of a predefined role, these to her, they're all forms of self-deception, or what's sometimes called bad faith. And what does that mean? Well, basically, it means that all forms of passive happiness are a denial of one's freedom and one's responsibility. So, given what she says then about passive happiness, I'd say that for her, true happiness, or let's say genuine fulfillment, is only something that comes from active engagement with the world, with exercising one's freedom and shaping one's life through meaningful choices, or by choosing projects and by putting oneself to the test, so to speak. In other words, to exercise one's freedom means to overcome and to transcend, not to fall back to a condition of acceptance and passivity. As she puts it in another work, every time transcendence falls back into immanence or stagnation or rest, there is a degradation of existence. Well, so I think that's what happiness at rest is for de Beauvoir. It's a slight degradation of existence, an existential decaying. So real happiness for her, whatever else it may involve, needs motion and growth and courage, and so some resistance and some friction. What it ultimately is a state of becoming rather than one of settled being. Okay, well that brings me to Hannah Arendt. So what's her view on happiness? Well, here I'm interested in something that she calls public happiness. One I think that's somewhat close in spirit to de Beauvoir's conception of happiness, in the sense that they're both concerned with real action and engagement, not passivity or inwardness. Okay, but let's back up a bit, because there's an important distinction that Arendt makes that might help here. So what she does in her seminal work called The Human Condition is she makes a distinction between, on the one hand, the contemplative life, a life of thinking, and on the other hand, the active life. A distinction, by the way, that goes way back to Aristotle. Now, Arendt argues that historically, we've given a bit too much attention to the contemplative life and ignored the importance of the active life. And actually, Aristotle is one good example of someone who believed that thinking, or the theoretical life, was the highest and the best kind of human existence, and one that promoted the greatest kind of happiness. Well, again, Arendt instead focuses on the active life and tries to show just how important it really is and how essential it is for our happiness. Okay, so now, what does she mean by the active life exactly? Well, there are different components to it, but I just want to focus in on one here, namely what she calls action. So basically, action is the highest level of activity that we can engage in. And what it is something like freedom in political and social action. More specifically, it involves the coming together in society with others in an open, free speech realm, and without deception, discussing and persuading and challenging and cooperating with others with the end of carrying out political and social action to try to do what's best for people, to try to work out how to reshape and improve the world. Actually, it's the kind of thing that Arendt imagined was happening in the polis during the rule of Pericles in democratic Athens. That's what she was inspired by. Okay, so now how is all of this connected to happiness then? Well, public happiness, Arendt says, is something like the intense joy that accompanies speaking and acting together with others in a political and social forum. It's a happiness grounded in every person having a share and playing a part in public affairs and hopefully taking collective action. Or to quote Arendt herself, it's when people enjoy the discussions and the deliberations and the making of decisions. So notice something here. Notice that not unlike de Beauvoir, this is a form of happiness that is not marked by passivity or rest or inwardness or seeking refuge. It's not the kind of happiness one feels when one escapes from the pressure of the world into some kind of inner realm. And so this is not an individualistic happiness either. It has nothing to do with individual pleasure or comfort. No, instead, it's one grounded in relations with others and in discussions with others. What it is, well, it's a citizen happiness. Bye for now.